You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name and politics is our game. And we will be doing politics this evening because we have as our guest Mayor Kevin Burns. He is the mayor of Geneva. That's Geneva, Illinois, a city or town or village, whatever we say, of about 25,000 people. And he's an Illinois guy. He's been in Illinois all his life, born in Illinois, and about 3/4 of his life. All of his adult life and then some. Yeah. He's been in Geneva, Illinois. Is that right?
That's correct.
You're 43 now, and you moved there when you were 10. Augustana College, where he met his wife Terry, and he and Terry have 3 teenage daughters, right? So
That's
you're a
true.
family guy, family values guy, would you
In fact,
say?
met Terry in freshman year of high school.
Freshman, okay, so you met her before. You both went to Augustana College.
We were 13 years old. So.
Okay. Elected, more about our guests as we get into the show, but it's important to know that he was elected. It's a contested election in Geneva, and that was in 2001 with 72% of the vote. He was re-elected without opposition, scared off everybody in 2005, and it's a part-time job.
It's a part-time job.
So
as well as
how much time would you say you devote to that?
It varies week to week. I devote quite a bit of time, certainly early in the morning, after work. Weekends and evenings are busy doing mayoral stuff. And I'll take opportunities to take a vacation day here and there to address some of the issues in town.
What does it pay?
It pays approximately $10 an hour. So it's about a $20,000 a year job.
All right, and you supplement that by working for Midwestern University?
That's correct. I'm a professional fundraiser. I'm the Director of Development and Alumni Relations. My job is to raise money and connect with our students and then make certain they continue to be happy as alumni.
All right, and you'll be raising some money for your campaign in the 14th
Certainly
Congressional
will
District. Mayor Burns is running in the Republican primary in the 14th Congressional District. If you want to know where that is, if you're in Chicago and you go due west about 35 miles, you run into the 14th Congressional District.
That's right.
Give us a thumbnail. What's it like?
Either take North Avenue or Roosevelt Road, head west.
What are the big areas in the 14th?
The big areas are the Tri-Cities, Geneva, St. Charles, Batavia. As you head further north, it's Elgin. Further south, it's Aurora. You head out to Kendall County, the towns of Yorkville, Oswego. Continue west, and you hit towns like Dixon, Illinois. And further west still, you hit beautiful Geneseo and smaller communities yet.
All right, it's a contested primary. That seat has been held for 21 years by former Speaker Denny Hastert. He has decided not to seek re-election. There are now 3 candidates either in or will be in the Republican primary, and that is State Senator Chris Lawson, Jim Oberweis, and our guest this evening, Mayor Kevin Burns. We air in Aurora. We may be airing in other parts of this district as we go on. You're watching it probably on September 17th, so some of this show you'll have to adjust because some of the things we'll be talking about, we're going to hear some things like the well-known Patriot report.
Exactly.
May be known to people as we discuss it. We can guess what's in there, but we don't know. If you're watching it in this city, Chicago, it's the same thing. If you're watching in the Chicago metro suburbs, it may be just before that Patriot report comes out. We are talking issues, some people might say it's Iraq stupid, that's the Iraq war, it's immigration. So there are lots of issues, and maybe we'll find out from our guest what he thinks the major issues are. But let's just go to the issues, and let's start with the lightning round. We'll try to give us short answers. We'll come back and we'll have some more in-depth discussion. Going right to the global war on terrorism.
Yes.
Should we have more of that or less of that? What should the emphasis be for the United States? A greater emphasis on defending, say, the global war on terrorism, or less defense, less to worry about? Are we right, or are we the optimal amount?
I think certainly more makes sense.
More defense,
absolutely.
More on it, more focus.
Correct.
Okay.
As long as it's done in a strategic way, absolutely.
Offense. Do we need more offense in global war on terrorism or less?
I think we need more.
Okay. Would you agree with Mayor Giuliani, who said, that's something we've done right by going into Iraq? People may say, for a variety of reasons, may have been mistaken, we may have had mistaken premises, but his point is, be on offense. We don't want to be on defense. He says that's what the United States was prior to September 11th. Would you agree with Mayor Giuliani on that?
I do agree with the mayor in that regard. I also share what the mayor and others share, in a frustration and a concern with how things are going. But we can always look back, but now we're at a stage where we need to look forward. And how do we now responsibly carry out the duties that we've been assigned?
Should we have more or less aggressive interrogations of detainees in Gitmo or Guantanamo Bay?
Aggressive interrogation is absolutely appropriate, as long as we do so by the laws that we abide by. Torture, absolutely not.
Do we abide by the Geneva Conventions?
I think we do.
Even when we're dealing with terrorists who obviously don't have a country who signed it.
Right.
So what's the signatory for the terrorists that obligates us to abide by the Geneva Conventions?
I think we diminish ourselves by not abiding by that very convention that we've signed off on. Absolutely. We can still gain as much information by aggressive interrogation, but we diminish ourselves and our standing in the world if we take that next step and just get information via torture. It doesn't make sense.
Do you think we've gotten a lot of information that's been useful in terms of intelligence from those aggressive interrogations? Have we?
I suspect we've gotten.
That's the word. Is that what George
Absolutely.
Tenet said when he?
I think we have
former
gotten.
CIA director.
Yes.
Do you agree with Tenet on that?
I do.
Warrantless wiretaps. When we're talking foreign communications
Right.
from a foreign source, what we understand to be a foreign source, to another foreign source. In the past, 30 years ago, when we set up some rules to deal with this, well, there was no question about that because you could tap into that by going to a line from somewhere in Spain to somewhere in Italy. But now it turns out a lot of foreign calls, foreign to foreign, get routed through the U.S. And so we had to clarify this, or there was some effort to clarify as to whether we need a warrant when there's a foreign to foreign communication, because sometimes it went through the U.S. and therefore people thought we did need a warrant. So the short question is, foreign to foreign communications, should we have more or less of those warrantless wiretaps?
I think where evidence is overwhelming that communications may be detrimental to the United States security, we should be listening in, absolutely.
Without a warrant?
That is ultimately to be determined by the courts. My position is that we need to do everything we possibly can to ensure that whatever communication is going on, either internally, externally, that we're listening in to make certain that we're not at peril.
But the FISA Act was amended, or there was legislation that would be voted on. If you were elected to Congress, you would have been voting on that legislation. Sure. Ultimately, may be determined by the courts. But would you have supported that recent legislation that, at least according to the administration, was intended to make clear that a foreign to foreign communication did not require a warrant?
I would have supported
foreign to foreign communication, tapping that communication,
right,
did not require a warrant.
I would have supported that legislation. Okay. I also would have called for a sunset clause on any and all legislation that's imperative. If it's not working, we need to amend it.
But in this case, it's sunsetted within 6 months. Is that too short a sunset?
Personally, I think it is a little bit brief. I'm not certain what we can learn in a 6 month period.
5-year sunset?
No, I think a 2-year sunset is probably appropriate.
What about foreign communications to domestic? Would those require warrants, do you think? Again, would you like legislation to allow us to engage in those warrantless wiretaps for foreign to domestic or domestic to foreign when the administration thought such calls related to national security?
If the calls are related to national security, absolutely we have a right, we have an obligation, and we have a privilege to know exactly what's being communicated.
Without a warrant?
In some circumstances, absolutely without a warrant.
What are the circumstances?
It depends. If we know that there's hostile communiques coming into our country regarding opportunities to either damage our country, damage our intents, our national security, or economic security, I want to know about it.
And
certainly.
And if it means doing that without a warrant, then go ahead and do it without a warrant.
Absolutely.
Data mining, that was going on by the administration, that was released, that wasn't tapping into listening to phone calls, but it was looking for patterns that might suggest terrorist activity. Should we have more of that data mining or less?
I think what we have now needs to be explained better. And we all talk about how these different intelligence agencies have to work together more collaboratively. Clearly, I think they're doing a good job moving forward, but we've had some mistakes in the past. As long as they're working together, and as long as that information is being shared, I have absolutely no objection to it.
No objection to the data mining?
No objection at all.
Tracking financial transactions of terrorists, something that was a secret program, and then it was disclosed. Well, number one, should that have been disclosed? Were the publications that disclosed that, were they doing something hostile to the national security interests of the country?
I don't know. And we all are transparent in our financial transactions as Americans.
Right, but I mean, the idea was there was a program to track financial transactions
to see where the
of
money was
terrorists.
going.
Right, and that was
Sure.
a secret program, which was thought to be more effective that way.
Well,
Somebody got wind of that and decided they would publish that.
you'd
Was
have to ask that person what the motives are for publicizing it. It's ironic that
Is there anything wrong with the U.S. having a secret program to track financial
Absolutely not.
transactions of terrorists? No?
Not at all.
Okay. All right, Patriot Act. You would have had a chance to vote on that a few years ago if you had been in Congress. Would you have voted to support the Patriot Act?
I would have.
Okay, and you still would?
I would with some perhaps revisions.
Any specific things that you would
Yeah, I
tell us
think
about?
there needs to be a clearer discourse as to exactly what the ultimate goal of the Patriot Act is. I mean, we've seen and we've experienced some of the pressures on local libraries, for example, who are allegedly asked to report that if Jeff Berkowitz comes in and checks out a certain book,
Well,
that
that's the
should be,
law would permit it, but
That's-
were there any instances where that actually happened? In the
not that I'm
library?
aware of. But if the debate is held, then certainly there must be a concern.
So would you say that you should not have? That is, should the government have the right to go in and look for terrorists checking out books or not? In other words, under what circumstances, if any, would that information or should that information be released by the library to the government?
I would defer to the libraries, their boards, and their directors.
would?
Absolutely. I
So
would.
even if, say, the Secretary of Defense, Gates, said it was important to have that, but the American Library Association disagreed, you would go with the American Library Association?
The American Library Association, I believe, is in concert with every other American out there who's concerned about the homeland. We have neighborhood watch programs throughout the 14th District, throughout America. The essential element of those programs is to keep an eye on one another, to report something that might be a little suspicious. If someone is walking into a local library to do research, I doubt very much that is their primary source of research. The majority of the information that people get online, that becomes available, is done online. I'm not going to go down to my local library to check out books regarding how to build nuclear bombs or attack someone. I don't think it's realistic.
But I'm not sure the answer to the question is if the government wanted the authority with a showing that they should be able to get that information.
Then that should be negotiated in the proper channels, whether it be in Congress, whether it be at the state legislature, whether it be through and with cooperation of the ALA.
And in terms of whether you'd support that legislation if you're in Congress.
Depends on the final language of the legislation.
Okay. Privatization, some people call it, others say individual control of your Social Security funds to decide how they're invested in stocks, bonds, or otherwise. Similar to what, with constraints, just like people
Sure.
can invest their funds now in 401ks.
Right.
Should they have the same kind of flexibility, individuals, to invest their funds in Social Security as they can in 401ks?
I think we should experiment. I think we should take a slice of what's currently available and make it available to the individuals to direct their own future. Absolutely. And we can measure whether or not that's actually working, whether
Okay.
it's a hamper to the individual or even the financial markets.
Free trade. Again, simple answer, more or less. Should we
Sure.
have more free trade or less free trade?
Well, of course, more.
Okay, so generally, would you have supported NAFTA way back when it was
I
passed
did
10 years
support
ago? You
NAFTA,
did support
yeah.
NAFTA. And a few years ago, CAFTA, you would have supported that as well?
Absolutely.
And you still support NAFTA and CAFTA, is that right?
There are always issues with any of these major pieces of legislation that come up after the fact. And I do still support NAFTA.
Okay.
Absolutely.
If, going over to the war, do a little bit more than just more or less.
Okay.
I've read on your website, and that website is?
BurnsForCongress4.com.
Burns for Congress, okay. And that's you, so it's BURNS, the number 4.
Correct.
Congress.com.
.com.
If people go to the website, they can find out some
They
bit
can.
about your information, about you, your background, your
Correct.
issues. They can also find out there that in terms of the war, you support the recommendations of the Iraq Study Group, right?
I do.
At least that's what it said.
It's exactly. And
But that group was prior to the end of last year, right? In terms
Sure.
of the recommendations. Do we know under that group, for instance, how many would they keep? How many would the Iraq Study Group recommend? They'd recommend a drawdown of troops in Iraq, but would they recommend that a certain amount be left there to fight Al-Qaeda, to do training, and to provide supplies to the Iraq
that's
soldiers?
exactly
Iraqi
what they
soldiers.
recommend. The final number has to be determined by those leading the effort on the ground. And I think we all agree with that. It's easy for Kevin Burns, the mayor of a medium-sized city in Illinois, to say
Do you
one
think they
thing.
had an idea? Because if there are 160,000 in there now,
Right.
would it be fair game for the president to say, well, I'd like to leave 100,000 there to do that?
I think it's absolutely fair game.
It is,
And then
okay.
ultimately,
If
it's,
he
it's
thinks that's
determ-
appropriate,
if
the
he thinks
commander-in-chief?
that's absolutely.
Okay.
And if the generals on the ground think the same thing, now we have a serious debate to be had.
But has the situation changed in the sense that since December, General Petraeus came in, took control, started a counterinsurgency effort, right?
Right.
Which really is a new strategy, had not been used before. He
The
kind of
surge.
wrote the surge, but it was
Right.
more than just the additional troops, because at least the administration, as they tell it, says this was about counterinsurgency. So these troops and other troops would now be involved in an effort to counter the insurgents, to win the hearts and minds of the Iraqis there, so they would help them, help the soldiers, the
Right.
coalition forces,
Right.
the Iraqi soldiers, the U.S. soldiers. Apparently that had not been happening before, so it's a different focus. Would you agree?
Well, absolutely. I think the mission has to constantly evolve. The nature and the core theme of the Iraq Study Group is exactly that. The mission has to change as situations change on the ground in Iraq and in the region.
All right, and has it succeeded? That is, have there been cases now where in the provinces where the Sunnis who had been supporting Al Qaeda have turned on them and supported the coalition forces to go after Al Qaeda? Is that what people point to as the success story coming out of Anbar province?
Province, right.
You're familiar with that?
I'm familiar with it based on the information that I read, like every other American reads.
Okay. And al-Sadr's army has been told to hold back now for 6 months or something like that. So the administration would say there's now positive progress in getting the Shiite radicals to back off, getting the Sunni radicals to back off, having a positive success story. Has the situation changed, and is there room? Well, one, do you agree with that? Has there been a success story coming out of Iraq in the last 9 months that's significant?
I think there has been some progress. I think there has been additional frustration. I, like most folks, are waiting for this report by General Petraeus, and then we move forward. It's likely that not every benchmark is going to be met. Right. We know that. It's also understood that we can't win militarily. We have to win militarily, politically, and diplomatically. And all three of those elements have to be worked on together. Separately, we get nowhere. And we remain perhaps where we are now, a couple years from now, which is in no one's best interest.
So, and again, we're taping this in early September.
Correct.
If you're watching it in the 14th Congressional District, you're probably watching it in the middle of September. You'll know what General Petraeus had to say. We don't. We're laboring under speculation somewhat. And if you're watching the Chicago metro suburbs, you may know that as well. Expected about the middle of September to be released, right?
Correct.
The White House has got its own report, right?
I would assume they would have
Okay.
Absolutely.
So if General Petraeus said, look, things are working well, some indicia are improved, some are not, but he recommends continuing, that is, having substantially the same troops into 2008, so that he can have the full benefit of this counterinsurgency and then report further. Would you go with the general on that?
I would go with the general on that.
Okay.
As long as the general understands, which I trust he does, that additional benchmarks must be met as we move forward. If the report says that 5 of the 13 or 18 benchmarks have already been achieved, then what do we need to do differently to ensure that additional benchmarks are met? If it's the same troop level, then I think we have to give our generals on the ground the benefit of the doubt.
Okay. Iran. Iran is speaking of a power vacuum now. Ahmadinejad has said that if the U.S. goes, they have a power vacuum and Iran is ready to step in. The Iraq Study Group seemed to say we should work with Iran, work with Syria. Can you really work with somebody who's talking about stepping into the power vacuum, somebody who's developing a nuclear capability, somebody who's thumbing their country's collective nose at the surrounding countries, not just the U.S., and saying they're not going to back off, they're going to be able to enrich uranium and have a nuclear capability? Can you work with Iran in those circumstances?
I think you cannot, put it this way, to not seek cooperation, to not invite others to participate in a regional process is failure in and of itself. The Iraq Study Group says it pretty eloquently, that these are short-term and intermediate goals. The Iraq Study Group has some flaws, but if we as the United States don't invite Iran, Syria, and others to at least participate, they do, by their very nature, become isolated.
Well, we've done that. We've spoken with them, and we've the United States and the coalition forces have complained about Iran's intervention militarily and involvement in the Iraq war. So We are engaged with them. We're not ignoring them.
No, of course not. We have to remain engaged with them.
But you could see it might appear to some naive to think that Iran and Syria will be part of the peace process as opposed to part of the war process.
Reports issued yesterday show that Iran's nuclear capability is actually slowed. Is that a result of engaged negotiations and
I
diplomacy?
thought it was the other way around. I thought
know.
their enrichment capability was now thought to be proved.
It might be proved, but it's not rising at the same level that we had originally intended. Is that the result of diplomatic engagement? I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm certain that'll be an element of the report that General Petraeus provides as well.
Going back to the beginning of the war, if you were there in the fall of 2002 and you knew what people were thought to know then and what they thought about weapons of mass destruction, would you have voted to authorize the president to take military action?
Yes, I would.
You would have, okay. But if you had known that there were no weapons of mass destruction, others didn't, but say you had known, that was your information, would you have then voted against it?
It's a hypothetical question. I don't think our going into Iraq was in and of itself primarily based on WMD. To get rid of Saddam Hussein was important. We achieved that. And now we're struggling with what to do moving forward.
So even if you knew there were no weapons of mass destruction, you would have supported that because you wanted to change the regime?
Because it was in our best interest, the Middle East's best interest, Iraq's best interest.
To get rid of Saddam Hussein?
No question about it. The entire argument was about WMD. We now realize that perhaps that wasn't altogether accurate. But based on what I would have known then, absolutely I would have supported the resolution.
Domestic issues, some domestic issues will go back and forth.
Okay.
Immigration. Should there have been or should there be enhanced border control before there's comprehensive immigration reform?
I think they have to go hand in hand.
You think so? So would you have supported the bill for comprehensive immigration reform? I guess it was called McCain, Kennedy, Gutierrez.
Right. If you read the entire bill, it's got some very innovative approaches.
On border control as well as immigration.
Exactly.
Comprehensive. So you would have voted for that?
I would have voted for that, knowing full well that it also addresses not only border control, not only immigration amendments, but also inviting the business community to participate with us. It's critical. We all have to do
stronger
it
stronger employer sanctions. Is that
Certainly.
Right? Biometric cards, ways in which
Perhaps.
employers can identify. You'd support all of that. Ways in
Yes,
which
I would.
employers can more easily identify whether the person who's applying for a job is who he or she purports to be.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
A fence, would you support a fence across or some kind of a barrier across the entire southern border of the United States?
Well, we know that appropriations have been made for exactly that, but nothing's been done.
Not for a full fence, right?
Not for a full
maybe
fence.
Maybe a third
right,
of the
about
distance.
700 miles, I think.
But nothing's been done?
No, nothing's been done.
Why is that, do you suppose?
I don't know. I don't know. My suspicion is that some of the border states might not, in fact, be in favor of that. I don't know. And I don't believe a fence is going to do anything without the appropriate technology, too.
Well, a fence with drones, with unmanned drones, with sensors and so forth, all of that you might support as part of what? I don't want to put words in your mouth,
Sure.
but would you support that?
I would support a comprehensive, it cannot be only border security. I think that's a simple approach to a more complicated problem.
What are the other major things it needs in addition to border security?
Well, just as we talked about, we need to have our state and local leaders be able to rely upon the federal government to provide assistance. Every state in this union is affected by illegal immigration. A report out just today in the Chicago Tribune talks about Marshalltown, Iowa, where they've had raids in their meatpacking plants time and time again.
Is that appropriate?
The raids?
Should the INS be raiding and looking for illegal immigrants in plants and employers?
I think we should be looking for illegal immigrants.
And taking appropriate action to deport
Absolutely.
those if they find those?
If they find them, correct.
Okay. Taxes. Would you make the Bush tax cuts permanent?
I would.
Okay. Would you consider raising taxes as a part of a compromise, say for people with income above $200,000 or families with annual incomes above $200,000, $300,000? Is there some room there where you would negotiate in order for keeping most of the Bush tax cuts? If you were in Congress and say you didn't have either in the minority or you had,
Sure.
if not, or you had a majority but not overwhelming, could you see that negotiating to keep many of the Bush tax cuts but give up on some?
I don't know. The Bush tax cuts are working. We all know that. Every state in the union has produced.
So if you had your druthers, you wouldn't repeal any?
No, I would not. Okay. I would not. In fact, I'd make permanent quite a few, eliminating the death tax, etc.
Marginal cuts in marginal tax rates, would you make those permanent too?
Certainly.
Is there anything you can think of that you wouldn't make permanent?
I can't think of right now, no.
Okay.
No.
Education. Is there a need to improve education in the 14th Congressional District? Outside? What?
Well, I think you'd have to ask the districts that question.
What's your feeling overall? If you looked at the 14th Congressional District overall, would you say education's going pretty well?
I think we're doing a pretty good job because parents are involved, kids are engaged, communities are involved as well. We can't rely on schools to do all the work.
Do you have any charter schools in the 14th Congressional District?
Not that I'm aware of.
Would you support that concept?
Of course.
Okay. Would you support the concept of school vouchers, school choice?
I am generally in favor of that.
Okay. Merit pay for teachers, you'd support that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Cultural issues. Gays, lesbians, bi, transgenders, in terms of, would you support legislation, federal legislation that ban discrimination against those individuals in those groups in housing and employment?
Of course.
Okay. Civil unions, you would be for?
I have no objection to civil unions.
Same-sex marriage, you would be opposed?
I am not a fan of same-sex marriage.
Does that mean you're opposed to it?
I believe that is a decision that the states have to make. It's also got religious consequences. And I don't think anyone wants their congressperson deciding who or who should not pursue marriage.
Well, but the state issues the license, don't they? I mean,
correct.
Do they have to go to the religious groups to say whether it should issue the license?
Oh, not necessarily, no.
So the state
but it does have a
decides.
religious component. I think we all know that.
So you're saying the state should decide, if some states decide to have same-sex marriage, you're okay with that?
It's up to the state. If the people of that state support their government in pursuing that option, that's up to the state.
So you wouldn't support a constitutional amendment that prevented
I would
states
not.
from having same-sex marriage?
I would not.
Okay. Abortion. Would you keep it as it is? Some people describe the current situation as pretty much abortion on demand. It's legal, and anybody who wants it can pretty much get it. Is that kind of your understanding of the law?
It's some people's understanding of the law.
What's your understanding of the law?
My understanding of the law is that legal abortions are now permitted under the United States Supreme Court. Roe versus Wade still stands.
When you say legal abortions, are there any abortions that aren't permitted under the current law?
Well, certainly partial abandonment birth.
Partial birth abortions.
Yes, those have been
That's been
upheld. Absolutely.
Okay. And that had an exception for the life of the mother, but not for the health of the mother. You're okay with that?
You know, I'm pro-life.
You're pro-life.
Absolutely.
And that means individually you're pro-life.
Clearly.
You and your wife would probably not choose to have an abortion.
That means that I came to that decision through reflective thinking of my own, and I have every respect for everyone else who perhaps has a different opinion.
But you're not pro-life in the sense that you'd like to see Roe v. Wade overturned, so other people who disagree with you they could not go ahead and get an abortion. You don't want to make abortion illegal, do you?
I don't want Kevin Burns' decisions to impinge the rights of others to make their own. And as a congressperson, I most likely will not have that opportunity.
Okay. But you could, well, right, that's probably a judicial decision, but you have some impact on that. As partial birth abortion was passed by the Congress.
Right.
Parental notice, would you favor parental notice?
I do favor parental notice.
Parental consent, do you favor that too? Parents have to give consent before their minor daughter can have an abortion?
It's a case-by-case example. I think parental consent, flat out, it has some challenges to it.
With judicial bypass, the minor can go to the judge and get, if there was an incest, rape, something like that.
And it's a bad family life. I mean, what are we doing to the child?
We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll. But I very much want to thank our guest, Mayor Kevin Burns, who is a candidate in the Republican primary in the 14th Congressional District. Thank you so much for coming, Kevin.
Thank you very much.
We hope you'll come back.
I will.
You've got competition, so we'll be talking about this race up until the primary, which is February 5th, the year 2008. But more on some of these cultural issues.
Sure.
Guns, okay? Somebody's described this gays, guns, God, abortion.
Right.
We've covered most except for guns. There was a federal ban on assault weapons from 1994, I believe, to 2004.
Mm-hmm.
It lapsed. Should it have, if you were in Congress, would you have pushed to keep that ban on assault weapons?
I would have voted for
You would have
retaining it.
supported
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think it's a reasonable approach.
Concealed carry, something like 30, maybe 38 states, I'm not sure the number, more than 30 states
right.
have concealed carry. In general, I know it's more of a state issue than a federal issue, but in general, you support the concept of concealed carry?
In general, I support the Second Amendment. I think it works very, very well.
So does that mean you support concealed carry?
Depending on how the legislation's worded, I would certainly be amenable to looking at that.
In Illinois?
In Illinois.
Okay. Healthcare. You talked about on your site about fixing healthcare, and we only have a minute or two left, but what would you do to fix healthcare? And you've talked about putting the competing interests in a room.
Right.
But what does that mean? Are you for universal healthcare?
I am for the best coverage you can possibly provide in the most economical way. I do not believe, and I would fight against the government itself being the dispenser of that care. I just don't think it works. I don't think it works at all. I think it's in our best interest, it's in the insurance company's best interest, the patient's best interest.
So you want to retain the private provider status. You wouldn't
essential.
You wouldn't want a single payer like Hillary
No.
Clinton. Okay.
I would not.
Would you expand Medicare?